all the time preparing this, what I thought about is, I feel like we're kind of doing this at Riverside. I feel like we've put the kingdom first for the last 10 years, and actually now we've run out of money. So I'm not quite sure how that parable is working for us. But anyway, do not worry about material things has been what I thought about. Do not worry about material things. To me, this seems really counterintuitive, and it also links with what we talked about last week. Do you remember the story from last week? So last week we talked about the person who built bigger barns, and they prepared for themselves for the future. We talked about it in terms of, preparing your nest egg for retirement, which seems like a really wise thing to do. But then the guy died, and he's not able to extend his life. Maybe some of you went there. If you were here last week, you went back to last week's story and see how they're connected. Jesus says almost the same thing here. He says, who of you can add a span to your life by worrying? Now, apparently, they're not entirely sure whether the span is whether you can make yourself taller or whether you can make your life longer. It says, who can add a span? So different versions, I think, go with different things. But how many of us can make our life longer by worrying? How many of us can change our physical appearance or stature by worrying? And the answer is we can't. Not yet. I mean, one day they might have to change how they preach on this when we've worked out life extension for 300 years. But normally, you cannot make your life longer. You cannot change yourself, make yourself taller. And if you cannot change these little things, then how can you even begin to think about changing the other things? Can we move on to... So what the story made me think about is the examples of flowers and birds. Think about the stress that you live under, worrying about the future, worrying about planning, worrying about material things. These are really basic things, worrying about what you'll eat or drink or what you will wear. So we think about these, we think about these things every day. And yet, can you imagine for a moment the freedom of not having to worry? Can you imagine the freedom of not having to worry where it all comes from? Because you trusted, like someone that has no agency. I doubt, you can correct me, the biologist, but I doubt birds even have the capacity to sit down and plan ahead. I doubt there are many bird mortgage advisors and whatnot, although they do travel from Africa back to the Tay, the ospreys, so there's something clever going on here. But they're generally without agency compared to us, and yet God provides for them every day. How amazing would it be to be free of the day-to-day anxiety for your existence? How many of us live with constant anxiety? How many of us are medicating for anxiety? And yet, imagine if that particular area of worry could be removed. Trusting, just like the birds or the flowers, just existing, trusting that God will always provide. So as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about control. How much of our anxiety about the future and about material things and making sure that we have enough and providing for ourselves and worrying, how much of it is actually to create the myth of control for ourselves? Some of us in a situation of crisis like to flap because it feels good to be doing something, even if what you're doing is making no difference to your situation whatsoever. So how much of our life is like that, where we by worrying, we feel like we're actually making a solution. By worrying, we feel like we have some element of control and power in our situation. And yet he's saying, it doesn't make a difference, does it? How many of you make any difference to your life through this illusion of control? And actually, given that we cannot extend our life or change our material and physical circumstances, certainly not at will, then perhaps we would find the freedom we desire if we gave up that illusion of control, trusting that God would provide for us. Can we skip on, please? But these thoughts bother me, okay? Last week, we talked about the idea of prudence. So, to be prudent is to act thoughtfully and sensibly about the future. And we talked last week about how that makes a lot of sense, actually. So Jesus' teaching is hard because he's saying, this man that looked like he was planning ahead and being very prudent was actually doing the wrong thing, when it feels like the right thing to plan ahead and to think sensibly. So last week we learned about being imprudent, and that's difficult. This week we have to lack foresight, which is kind of similar. So the birds do not have the foresight. They do not look ahead particularly to their long-term future. Now, they're probably pre-programmed to do certain things for their future. They build nests, they look after their young, they procreate, but they don't make pension plans. They don't do the kind of things that we do to look ahead and plan and get some element of control. And so, why on earth is Jesus asking us to be imprudent and to live in a way that lacks foresight? This feels foolish to me. I feel like Jesus is asking me to be foolish, and that bothers me. But is that because I'm such a control freak that I can't handle the idea of not worrying about the future? Is it because I'm such a control freak that I like the illusion of some kind of power over my future? What would it mean? What does it feel like or look like to live in freedom by handing that over to God and recognizing that I can't extend my life? I cannot guarantee my future circumstances. I can plan, but my plans don't necessarily come to fruition. And yet the plans of God happen, don't they? What would it feel like to remove the burden of control, or the living under that illusion and maintaining that illusion? It's hard work being a grown-up, isn't it? Maintaining that illusion that we are in control of our future and our surroundings. God wants to give us freedom as his children from the anxiety of control, the anxiety of this illusion that we have ultimate power, when ultimate power only belongs to him. This is not the only time that God asks us to live like fools in this world, is it? Remember when he talks about the gospel, and he explains that the gospel is complete foolishness. We preach the foolishness of the cross. We preach a story about the only one whose plans always come to fruition, the only one who actually can plan for the future and know that it will happen, the only one who has ultimate authority, gave it all up and put himself into a position of vulnerability. The Son of God puts himself into a position of not having control anymore. And to this world, that story of Jesus giving of himself, emptying himself, giving his life, dying for us, is absolute foolishness. Could it be that this is part of the cross, that we live imprudent lives that lack foreknowledge or foresight, that we trust in an ultimate sense, we trust God to provide in the way that animals just get up each day and expect things to go the way they need to go. And so there's a simple challenge this week, which is, what would it be like to live that way? Now, please, right? Do not walk out of here, cancel your pension plans, give it all away, and then tell me that I told you to do that, right? Please don't. And this is why. Stick up the last picture. I hope it worked out, because it took a while making this image. Hope it works. Yes. Let's go back to considering the ravens. Do ravens live forever? No. Do they ever starve? Yes. I don't think Jesus' story here is an absolute story. I think it's like most of the wisdom literature. So let's think about that. You know how in the book of Proverbs it says, we've done this before, but anyway, the book of Proverbs says, make good choices and live wisely, and your life will go well, and your children will turn out great, and you'll live a long time. And then the book of Psalms says, yeah, but I did all that, and my life's rubbish, and the people that don't follow you and trust in you, Lord, are having a great time. What went wrong? So the wisdom books are not absolutes. And I think this is about cultivating an attitude. Now, I may be wrong. God is free to ask us to do, and it does say at the end there, sell stuff, Give the money to the poor. Stop living like this. So I think this is about an element, especially to our society, of giving up control. It may not be in an absolute sense, but it's certainly an attitude that we need to cultivate. Now, I probably shouldn't say this, but as I read this, I thought this is probably like the most Buddhist-sounding part of the Bible, eh? Please don't quote me. But you know, we have to live detached from material things. Material things must not define us. Our pension plans, our jobs, our homes, our cars, our plans for our next car, you know, the job that our kids might get and where they're going to study, all these things must not define us because they are not ultimates. They're not ultimates. We must put them in their proper place and live in such a way that being generous, living lightly on the land, allowing things to slip through our fingers, not grasping at wealth, making decisions that your neighbours and friends and colleagues might think are foolish for the sake of God. Last week, the last line, acting richly towards God. We need to cultivate an attitude, and that attitude will be very hard to cultivate because it's so different from the world around us. All the time, we are being told to plan for our future, to make sure we have financial security, to do the best, to get the most out, to extract the most profit, all these things. And we are being asked to sit light to all of that and live with a completely different attitude. And actually, that attitude is the same as the one of the cross, isn't it? Jesus didn't consider equality with God something to be held on to, but he took the form of a servant. This is the same kind of thing, that we are not to consider equality with God something to grasp at. We are not to try and hold on to this illusion of control and having determination over our ultimate future. Because just like the guy in the story last week, we could do all that planning, and then God could say, "You foolish person, this is the end for you. Someone else is going to inherit all that wealth." I've got an application for you, and it's a really silly one. My brother turned up this week with a bottle of the Herrick, which I've been greatly anticipating, the new Harris whiskey. And then I realised it's a first release, and I sat looking at it thinking, this will probably be worth something in the future. Oh dear. And I stuck it on a shelf for a night and thought, the prudent thing to do with foreknowledge and foresight would be to keep this and save up till I can afford another one. And then I woke up the next day and thought, I could get hit by a bus and my kids will inherit this. What's the point? So I opened it, and I'm glad I did. It was imprudent and lacking foreknowledge. Please don't take the wrong application for that as well. We are to live as fools for Christ. Sometimes that means making decisions that other people will not understand. And yet we've to have this renewed attitude of not holding on to power and control and authority that was only ever an illusion. And if we could do that, we might be free of anxieties and worries and concerns that we could never achieve anything through. Our circumstances, our material circumstances, are not changed by worry. They are only ever changed by trust. Our circumstances will never be changed by worry, but they may be changed by trust. Let's pray.